Welcome to Webinar Wisdom, a series of podcasts which explore how webinars can become a successful part of your sales and marketing program. Hi, I'm your host, Dave Williams, and if you've reviewed our program outline posted at webinarwisdom.com, you'll know our podcast topics and expert interviews are designed to help you avoid costly mistakes and create a webinar that will produce more sales opportunities, generate greater revenue, and build satisfying relationships with prospects and customers. In the last podcast, I tried to present the 5,000-foot picture of what is a webinar and why is it of value to you. Now today we're going to change gears. We're going to move right into some very practical information that I've gained over the last few years of working with a variety of clients and helping them to create what is considered an effective webinar. I'd like to discuss with you some of the key issues that we've discovered that you really should consider before you host a webinar that is specifically designed to attract new customers and generate more sales. In fact, this will be the first of a series of podcasts dealing with the webinar EQ, helping you identify your webinar effectiveness quotient and what are the elements that you should analyze in order to generate the kinds of results that you're expecting. My goal is to create a series of podcasts that, in essence, will become a guide that you can follow to help you quickly and easily gain new sales leads and generate more revenue. Now, it doesn't really matter whether you're new to holding a web event. This is a good starting point to begin. We're going to cover a number of different topics that will be of value to you. Or you may fall into a different category where you are experienced, but you're disappointed with your actual results. Regardless of which group you fall into, the guide and analyzing your webinar effectiveness quotient will help you decode what's required for success. Quite often, I receive a similar kind of feedback, a number of questions that people generally ask when I talk to them about what does it take to be successful in a webinar. The first comment that is often made is, why should I hold a webinar? I've been holding teleseminars and they work just fine. Well, throughout this series of podcasts, I'm going to share with you the difference between a teleseminar and a webinar. And you'll see that there's a lot to be gained over a teleseminar when you actually hold a webinar. A second point that's often made is I can't hold a webinar because I don't have a list. I don't have anyone to invite. Again, I'm going to walk you through some of the steps that you can take in order to develop a list of people that would be eager to hear your message. The third issue that's often raised is webinars just don't work, and so I've stopped the process. Why is that? Well, they say, I've sent out invitations, but they're being ignored. In fact, I can remember a recent client I was working with that, had sent out 35,000 invitations and generated only a few dozen people who wanted to attend their session. It's also equally frustrating when people actually do register, but they don't show up. A very common problem. Again, recalling a different client situation, they had nearly 150 people who had formally registered for their session, but only 4 or 5 of them actually showed up on the day of the event. A further frustration that often arises is when you do finally find people who have registered, actually do attend. When it comes to your call to action statement at the end of your web event, people do not show any interest in buying your product or your service. A client I'm working with currently, for instance, was trying to introduce a new DVD program that they had developed. And although they had a very successful launch, a number of people attending the webinar to hear about it, over a number of webinar presentations, they ended up only selling 4 copies of their DVD. People would naturally sit back and say, so why the heck am I doing webinars? I can't seem to get people to attend. I can't get people to register. I can't get people to buy my products. Even so, you will quite naturally decide to stay in contact with that group of people with either a newsletter or a series of emails. And it becomes very frustrating when you discover that that further contact is often considered as spam by those people. And you scratch your head and say, well, I don't understand this. I mean, people were interested in attending. Why are they marking me as spam? And spam can create a great deal of problems. In fact, it can get you blacklisted with your ISP. And I'll talk about the details of that. So you can see there are a number of questions that people raise when they start to decide, why should I put on a webinar and what can I do to make a webinar successful? Obviously, I believe that there is an answer. You can meet your expectations. Actually, the Webinar Effectiveness Quotient is a blend of practical knowledge with a few webinar secrets that you'll pick up if you listen to each of the podcasts in this series. The key point is that it is a marketing process, that webinars are more than just sending out invitations and doing a slide presentation. Unfortunately, I've come to realize that most people consider webinars a very simplistic process, that there's really not much to learn or understand. Whether I decide to use the telephone or the computer as an assist to present my slides, all I really have to do is get a mailing list, send out some invitations, do my presentation, and do a follow-up of that audience. And that will give me my desired result. However, as I've just finished stating, that's really not always the case. There are a number of people who become very frustrated with their webinar process. They find it doesn't meet their expectations, it doesn't work, and they really don't know why. So what I really want to spend some time talking about is, what should you evaluate? What are the criteria that you should become aware of that are going to impact your webinar success? And not surprisingly, the additional factors to evaluate are very logical. They're things that would normally come to mind if you sat down and thought through, what do you have to do in order to put on an effective webinar? There are, in fact, 7 factors that I'm going to address in our upcoming podcast series. And the discussion will center on the topics of the registration process, promoting the event, motivating the audience to register and actually attend, how to approach your audience to maximize the call to action results, what kind of technology is available in the market that you should evaluate that will impact your success, what expectations are realistic when you think of your call to action, and what's the best way to do follow-up after your webinar event. And within those areas, I think the questions that should be answered that are going to provide a high webinar EQ, or therefore increase your webinar effectiveness, will be, who can I invite to my webinar, and how will I speak with them using the telephone or the computer? Is there anything that is different because of the fact that I'm using the telephone or a computer than I would if I was meeting people face-to-face? What technology in the market is required to maximize my effectiveness? How will I promote my event? How do I motivate people to register and actually attend? How do I engage my audience so they don't leave? How do I increase my call to action results? And how do I stay in touch with an audience so I can achieve an ongoing relationship with them? To begin the process, I really believe there may be a mindset change that you'll have to go through. I think it'll become clear as we get into the webinar marketing process that effectiveness is dependent upon your need to learn a new way to think about your role and approach and the way you see your prospects and customers. Generally, I would like you to consider changing your focus away from selling and to put it on helping the customer decide to buy. And that in itself is a very strange concept for a lot of people, because traditionally we've been taught that if we're holding a sales meeting, either whether it's face-to-face or on a teleseminar, what we want to do is convince the prospect to buy our product or service. And we do that by discovering their needs, building value, creating a desire, overcoming their objections, and naturally closing the sale. However, there's a new approach, a relationship selling approach that's been around for a while and is now coupled with Web 2.0 social media techniques. And this particular approach allows you to change your focus and try to let the buyer convince themselves of the value of your product or service. You're not really in a sales mode. You're going to use conversational marketing techniques and focus on building trust and confidence with that audience. It's generally understood that people buy from others that they like, that they know, that they trust. And so in the relationship approach, we're taking the focus away from selling and on determining and uncovering ways to allow the future customer to decide to buy on their own. In essence, in one role, you're seeing yourself as a salesman. In this latter relationship role, you're seeing yourself as a trusted advisor. Now, I don't want you to interpret my statements as meaning that I think one style is better or the other. In fact, it really depends on which aspect of the audience pyramid that you are focused on. And there's a term that's probably new to you. What the heck is an audience pyramid? And this is particularly important if you're going to try and decode the critical factors involved in webinar success. If you're not familiar with the audience pyramid, I'd suggest that you spend some time getting to know Chet Holmes. He's an incredible sales guru who has written a remarkable book called The Ultimate Sales Machine. Chet has spent his life helping businesses grow, develop incredible revenue potential. And you can learn about his process and technique if you visit his website at chetholmes.com. In his consulting practice, he references many times the importance of the audience pyramid. In other words, how would you evaluate what the percentages of the total market that are ready at any given time to purchase your product? I think we'll all probably agree that at any given moment, there's a percentage of your potential market for your product or service that is ready to buy now, and there's a percentage of the audience that will buy in the future. Chet talks about recognizing that if you looked at the total universe of people that you could talk to, you'd find probably about 3% of that market is interested in purchasing your product or service right now. And if you expand it a little bit further, you'd probably find there's an additional 7% of the market that would be open to the ideas that you're presenting. So if you were looking at inviting people to your webinar, there's probably 10% of the people you could invite that if you did a good presentation, they'd be interested right now in the message that you're bringing and probably will follow up on your product or service call to action. However, you'll find that there's a larger group of people, about 30% of the audience out there, that's not thinking about your product or service. And 30% would probably tell you if you interviewed them that they're not interested in what you're talking about, which would leave a final 30% of the total universe that would definitely not be interested in your message. I find this pyramid extremely interesting because it clearly depicts where you should be focused when you work on your webinar. There are two groups of people that you need to think of designing your webinar around. There's that 10% of the audience that are ready to buy into your product or service, and you can expect a high proportion of them following through on your call to action. And you've got another 60% of the total universe of your market that if you continue to stay in touch with them, they'll eventually get to the point where they are interested in your product or service. You can forget about the bottom third, but you can concentrate on a webinar approach that deals with the top 10% and then a follow-up process that brings the remainder 60% of the audience into an interest level that can lead to a product sale. Therefore, it's very clear that we need two distinct approaches when we begin to hold our webinar. We need to have a strategy of introducing our product and service in a way that appeals to the person who is interested in purchasing our product or service today. And then we need an ongoing process that helps us to work with an audience as they consider our message and are ready to work with us in the future. Therefore, what do you do and where do you begin your focus? If what we've been talking about is the very simple, basic webinar focus, then perhaps not all the factors are identified and we don't understand the steps that we have to take in order to meet both of those two groups. However, if we expand upon that basic process, we can see that there are a number of attributes which we can build upon and will likely enhance the likelihood of our webinar success. I feel it's really just a matter of looking more in depth at each of the areas of the webinar process. When we're deciding how to build a registration process, we really want to understand more about who our audience really is. As we just talked about, is the webinar audience going to be primarily composed with people who are interested in purchasing our products and services now, or are they people who are just going to be introduced to our topic and that we're going to have to stay in touch with them and cannot really expect that a high proportion of those people are going to buy into our message during our webinar process? If we're looking at splitting the audience into people ready versus people in the future who will be ready, we should also take a look at how have these people qualified themselves to be part of our registration process, and how large of an audience should we be talking to? 100 people, 25 people. I know, and you know, that there are some people who hold teleseminars and webinars with, 500, 1,000 people. And that audience, therefore, would be split among those people who are ready and those people who are just considering the message being brought to them. So when we're looking at the registration of who we're going to invite, we really want to look at the methods that we're going to use to invite just the right kind of people that we want to talk to during our particular session. It's not just a complete webinar mailing list that we're sending things out to, a purchase list or an in-house opt-in list that we've developed. We really are going to look at far more to the registration process to make sure that the people coming are, in fact, the people that we wish to talk to. To do that, we need to think through the promotion process. We should be thinking of doing things in a very creative way. It's not just a matter of sending out emails to people, because not everyone responds to emails. We do know that some people like to listen, some people like to watch, and there is a great proportion of people who like to read. Some of our marketing should be directed towards each of those individual modalities. And how we're going to introduce ourselves to people is a very important process. Other aspects of the webinar process that we want to look at is how are we going to approach that particular audience that we've defined during our webinar. And as was indicated, are we really at the end of our hour, 90 minutes, 2-hour session expecting the person to open their checkbook and buy our product and service? Or is this just the first step in a broader process? Perhaps our approach is going to be one of trying to have the audience define us as a trusted advisor, that during the process we're going to provide a good deal of information that's of value to them, and we'll want to, through that process, make people feel very comfortable, build an element of credibility and warmth and trust, which will in fact allow that group to consider us as a potential expert and thereby buy into our message and our product and service. The approach is going to dictate how we're going to choose our technology. Is the technology simply the telephone with some slides being presented on the computer, or are we going to replace the telephone with a voice over the internet system? Are we going to bring a live video camera and let the audience see us? Many different things that we could do in choosing our technology. And certainly when we're looking at the completion of our session, have we recorded it, and are we going to present it as an on-demand webinar for people who have missed our session? Will the presentation format that we use be the complete screen capture of our presentation, or will it be just the audio and we'll blend in slides later? Will it be recorded in such a way that we can edit it and refine it to get rid of those parts of the presentation that really don't make much sense to someone who is watching it as a recorded session? And then the final area to look at will be how are we following up on all of the people that have attended our webinar? Is it just an email and a newsletter or a PDF file? Or are we going to do something that are going to stay in touch with that audience on a continuing basis, knowing full well that some of the people have responded to our call to action? That may only be that small 10% of the audience that we're talking to, and we want to do something creatively to stay in touch with the other 60% of the people, so that group that we've built a rapport with through building trust and credibility, will on a continuing basis hear from us and continually feel that we are of value to them, and eventually will follow through with whatever call to action that we had in mind. So I hope you feel that there are many elements to a webinar process. And in future podcasts, as part of this Webinar EQ podcast series, I'm going to provide more depth of information in each of these very important critical factors. It should be very clear that there are the 7 factors that you should evaluate. We want to spend time looking at the registration process, how we select the audience, and what techniques we're going to use to invite people. We want to be creative in our promotional techniques. We may want to blend very traditional email promotion with all the new social media, podcasting, blogging, social networking, and so forth. We will want to consider what we're doing in our registration process that motivates people to actually attend. No question about it, audience engagement is critical. If they're not engaged with our message, they may not buy into our message directing them to our call to action. There's a choice to be made in terms of whether you're going to take the position of a trusted advisor or a traditional salesperson, and that's really dependent on your style and your goals of the outcome of your particular webinar. Depending on that approach, there is a wide range of technology to choose from, some that actually simulate and mimic real-life face-to-face meetings. It's not just a matter of a slide being presented on the screen. You can do far more. And of course, you want to evaluate just how effective your call to action results are. And the last factor that will impact your webinar effectiveness concerns how you will proceed with follow-up activities. As we've said many times in this podcast, there's only about 10% of the audience that will attend your webinar that is ready to buy. And to increase the number of sales leads and generate more sales, you'll want to develop a creative follow-up process that builds a relationship with that 60% of the remaining audience. It certainly will be far more than just sending out emails and a newsletter. There's many different techniques you can use to continue building trust and warmth and credibility with all of the people who attend your webinar. And that's really what the next few podcasts in this series are going to address. Today, all I've tried to do is set the stage for what are the factors that you've got to consider in order to increase the effectiveness of your webinar. The number one issue is really to leave today understanding that a webinar is far more than just an online slide presentation. You really must think of a webinar as part of a marketing process. And perhaps you may want to begin thinking in a new way about how you attract people to your webinar, how you talk to those people, and how you follow up with those people that are interested in your product or service. If you decide that you'd like to mimic what works well in a face-to-face meeting, you'll find that technology and marketing process can be a very good fit for you. It just requires some research and understanding of what is it you're trying to do and what kinds of technology on the market will really assist you as you put your webinar together. Another point that I tried to make is even though you may have an in-house list or you purchase a mailing list, just inviting people to attend will not necessarily mean that they will register. And even those that do register, you may have difficulty in actually having them attend. So there are additional things that you must consider if you really do want to have a responsive group of people who are qualified and interested in your message, so that when you provide an excellent presentation, your message is understood, that group of people decide that they want to stay in touch with you, and eventually buy your product or your service. If you begin to reevaluate how you approach putting on a webinar, you will develop a webinar that attracts sales leads and generates lots of revenue. So that brings us to the end of today's podcast. But there will be another podcast available quite soon. And just to give you an idea of what I'm going to cover, in this second podcast in the series, I plan to illustrate the concept that a webinar is like a power suit. You can get it tailored just for you, or you can look like everyone else who bought it off the rack. A webinar should be an extension of your marketing image. Just as you spend a lot of time dealing with your logo and your business card and your letterhead, the image that you present within a webinar is critical to how you attract prospects and generate customers. You really do want to create a webinar that suits you personally, and I'd like to show you how to go about doing that. I'll also want to expand upon the 7 factors that we've outlined today, and we'll begin talking about the way you generate leads and capture email addresses. I've got a chart that I want to present to you where you can select from about 48 different ways to generate those email addresses that are so important to send out invitations to people to your webinar. I'll also want to spend some time talking about the registration process. It's not a simple matter of just send out an invitation and confirm with an email letter. There is a 12-step webinar registration process that if you follow, you'll discover you have a larger number of people actually registering and even a larger number of people who actually attend. Some people consider that when you do an email invitation, it's an email blast. I consider it really an invitation. It's not just a matter of doing an email blast and accepting 2-3% of that audience actually registering. You can expect 15 to 20% of the people that you send an invitation to actually come to your registration page and leave an indication that they would like to attend. In fact, with some clients, you can build a process that will generate 50% of the people that you send information to coming back to your website to actually register. But there is a process, and it does involve using different modalities. As we said today, some people love to listen, some people love to watch, others like to read. And if you're going to promote your webinar, you will want to use all of those modalities effectively. So your next steps are quite simple. I'd like you to register your name and email address in order for you to stay current and be notified when the next podcast is available. If there's a personal question that you have, by all means, drop an email to dave@webinarwisdom.com. Glad to respond personally to you. If you have a problem that you'd like me to address, you can either drop it an email or go to webinarwisdom.com/askdave.html, and I'll be pleased to respond to your question or problem that you're having with offering webinars. And if you'd like to know more about webinars that work, we do have monthly special briefings, and you'll find the outline at the website webinarsthatwork.com. Please tell others about what these podcasts are about. I'd like to be able to help a number of people. And if you know of someone that is struggling with a webinar or hasn't yet decided how to go about beginning to offer a webinar, I'd love them to listen to our podcast series and get more information. So thank you very much for listening to this podcast. If you've been watching the slides on your computer, you'll also see that there's an area on the screen where you can enter your name and email address. Just do that and then click the Keep Me Posted button. And I'll put you on our mailing list, and I'll notify you when the next podcast is available for you. Again, thanks very much for your time. I hope I've been able to provide some good value to you. So until we meet again, take good care of yourself and look forward to talking to you in the near future.